Give me your view of the world as it is now, please.
Somebody asked me in a leadership session in Berlin a little while ago, what is the plague of our time? And this person, in setting the question, went through some of the plagues in history and said, we've not had that, or we have something now, but what is our plague? And I said, well, I think the plague of our time is likely to be fluidity. It's difficult for us to negotiate the amount of change that is going on across so many sectors all at one time. And there's a rising sense in many developed nations, certainly, of anxiety and depression on the back of that. So I think even with the pandemic, there's a lot of change going on and people they're not quite sure how to deal with that.
I want to ask you a couple of odd questions. I want to know what you think of the state of integrity in the world at the moment.
Well, I think integrity's in poor supply in some areas and in great supply in others. If you study things like the Edelman Communications and Trust Survey every year, you find that levels of public trust in public institutions have been shrinking for the last decade, to the point where this organisation and others are warning us about a crisis of trust in society. And so it's interesting to see at the moment how some of the elites we would normally mistrust have been trusted again. So we're putting greater faith in central government at the moment in the midst of the pandemic than we have done in a very long time. It's also interesting to me to see prime ministers and presidents around the world, whenever they address the public now, flanked by scientists and medicos. Medicos are about the only group in a global sense that haven't undergone a great decrease in trust, a trust deficit. So I think there's integrity there for the finding at the moment. But I think that there are other areas, obviously, of the world where there's not a great deal of trustworthiness. And can I say that trust, if there are any listeners who are leaders of anything today, let me assure you and encourage you that trust equals capacity to act. The only way that you can engage in any activity that affects people's lives is if they trust you. So your capacity to lead is very much linked to the trust you engender.
You are a Christian, is that correct?
That's correct.
What is the state of American Christianity at the moment?
Oh, well, now there is a 4-hour question. My biggest concern is that sections, and we are talking about sections, aren't we, of the church, not the whole church, sections of the church, which tend to be quite vocal and quite camera-friendly, are aligning themselves not just with power, which is never good news for the church. We always do better when we align with influence than with power. They've not only aligned with power, they've aligned with one brand of power, with one side of the power equation. And it wouldn't matter if this were Democrat or Republican in power. The same principle applies. What happens then when that side of politics is no longer in power? Your trust is tarnished, your reputation is reduced, you're no longer heard with the same credibility. And sadly, people's vision of you becomes their vision of the message you carry, the Christian message. So that's the thing that concerns me most at the moment about the scene in the United States.
And the business leaders that you're having these wonderful conversations with electronically, how are they feeling at the moment?
Well, some are feeling quite discouraged. Others are feeling relatively upbeat. We may find businesses becoming a lot more involved in what I call return on community. And there's been a swing in the last 10 years in some parts of the world towards considering the value of a company as partly measured by return on investment, but partly measured also on return on community. And most people now, we find, don't really want to work for companies that are just making returns for the shareholders. They want to do some good beyond the corporate front door. I think there's a new value system that can emerge in the partial and post-COVID era when it comes to return on community, social innovation, all of that.
And I can tell you, you'll be able to hear the second part of my interview with Mal next week. Some time ago, right, when we were in the old building, as we say, back on Oxford Road, we interviewed Mal, and he came up from where he lives down south, and he came up to Manchester, and we interviewed him live, and then we went for breakfast. It was one of the most beautiful, interesting things I have ever done. He is truly amazing.